Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Herrera. I'm your host today for our BCM Leadership Webinar Series, Planning Mock Disasters. A couple of things I'd like to talk a little bit about MHA Consulting. I'm the CEO of MHA Consulting since I founded the firm in 1999. We're now a leading business continuity firm to not only public but private organizations across the globe. And I will say we really definitely pride ourselves on not only our methodologies, our approach, our experience, and the work ethic that really leads to many lasting relationships with clients all over the globe. Typically, our relationship spans over 4 years with the majority of our clients. This gives you an idea. We're a privately held company out of Phoenix, Arizona. As you can see from the breadth and scope of our clients, this is not all of our clients that we work with across many different industries throughout those 20 plus years in operation. We've conducted many different types of mock disaster exercises, from the very simple tabletop to the highly complex functional exercises with multiple mediums of communication and inputs at multiple sites, not just in a state, but across the country. So can I tell you, we've seen it all when it comes to mock disasters. I started doing mock disasters back when I was with Bank of America back in the early 90s. And I tell you, we were so far ahead of the game. It greatly has aided me now in running MHA and producing mock disaster exercises for clients of all sizes, small, medium, and the very large. Lastly, we provide end-to-end consulting services, which one of those, of course, is mock disasters. Very important. What I'd like to talk about exercise very quickly here is you play like you practice. And I would hope is, again, today you take from this is, as you design your mock disasters, you will evaluate and take a look, where is your program and what type of exercises can I implement? Can I start with simple, move up to moderate to highly complex over time? So your team begins to play better and better. So when an event happens, it's not going to be perfect. And yesterday we had a 3-hour exercise with a client. And one of the terms that I always like to use is you want to get your team to the point when something does happen, it's organized chaos, not chaos. And I always love to use the example, my brother, fire chief, we always talk about this, that a lot of times you may see all these firemen at a site and it may look like it's havoc and no one knows what's happening, but I will tell you it's organized chaos. Everybody knows who needs to be where, who's where, are they inside, are they not, are they okay, are they in rehab? That's what we want to get to. It may look crazy to those outside, but in a real event, it's actually organized. And mock disasters prepare you in order to address a disruption and get your people organized in a way that it is organized chaos and you can work through that disruption. So what is a mock disaster exercise? It's a simulation of an unplanned disruption that requires participants. And those participants, especially in today's world, you may have some that are on site, some remote in different time zones, that requires them to identify the actions and steps they would take to successfully respond, assess the impacts and risks to the organization, activate resources that can be simulated or real, and then over time address how would they recover in a timely manner. Now, those actions and steps, very important to remember. You are going to have your crisis plans in front of them that they're going to use. They may have other scripts, but also remember mock disaster exercises are fluid like real events. And you need to let people at times, you remember that, use their brain power to go outside and potentially say, here's a better way to do this, or here's things we may need to do in order to address the specific type of disruption. So remember that. Very good. So what are we going to talk about today? Very important. One thing that I neglected to state, and my apologies, at any time, please feel free to submit your questions through the chat and we'll monitor those and get to as many of those as we can by the end of the session. Very important. Today, we're going to talk about the mock disaster exercise, the approach and methodology. I will say you need to have a standardized approach first and foremost. Is one of the things that I learned when I started this back in the late 80s, early 90s, was as I worked, I was very lucky to work with a very top level emergency management person that taught me a lot about planning exercises. And it always came down, we use the same approach each and every time, which ensures that we can design simple all the way to highly complex with this very similar, with the same approach, so that we get great outputs, great deliverables, we see progress. So what does that mean? We're going to talk about having the right people as part of your mock disaster exercise, the right planning, increasingly complex exercise to go from, again, to simple to moderately complex to highly complex, making sure your participants are trained in advance So that when they come to the exercise, again, they've already exercised their muscles a bit by you providing them with training, maybe a case studies. So when they come into the session, they're prepared. And again, in the end, you get more return on investment. Maturity appropriate exercises, again, depending on the capabilities of your team. What level do I need to do? Documenting the results. So important that we do the exercise. But at the end, what happened? Did it go well? Did it not? What do we need to correct? And very importantly, there's nothing worse than I see people document, spend all this time on exercises. You come back the next time and it hasn't been resolved. So that's really important in documenting, but also resolving the findings and action items you need to address. And then from all this is we're going to talk about updating the process, updating your plans, your communication processes, your protocols, your severity levels, all those things that you want to test as part of the mock disaster exercise. Now, types of exercise we're going to discuss as well. There's a structured walkthrough or tabletop, very similar. It's very controlled. Again, no one is pointing fingers at anybody. There is no that you didn't do this right or there's a gap in your plan. Remember, these are all learning exercises. Now, I will tell you, I've been through those exercises where there is evaluation. There is formal evaluation from government agencies, Homeland Security. That's a whole nother level of pressure that I've experienced. And not just as a facilitator, but very importantly for the participants. But what you want to do in your organization is make this fun. Make this feel you want some level of pressure and stress because that's how you, again, improve your processes through discomfort. But you want to be able to use structured walkthroughs, tabletops as those initial foray into here's how we're going to do this. We're going to teach you to crawl, walk, run, etc. As you move from the structured walkthrough to the tabletop, then you're going to start to move into more complex type mock disasters where you could actually have your crisis dealing with you could have your crisis team dealing with the simulated disruption, but you could also at that point also have aspects of your business or IT recovery during partial functioning. So you're now working all the teams together at once. And then we do have those very few. And I will tell you, in time, I hope we get to this because this will help us move from continuity to resiliency over time. We do have those very few that they will do their crisis exercises completely unannounced, full interruption, and they will move not only their crisis team, but aspects of their business, their production business, and actually simulate and get their production back up and running. Not simulate, they will actually execute them. Very few and far between do that. Okay. Some of the key trends in the future, I would say trends impacting mock disaster exercise planning. The majority of organizations are still, trying to get to best of class capabilities. So that does impact what type of planning I need to do. We are constantly constrained on training time. So a lot of our organizations, if they put very little to no emphasis on training or exercises, and when they do, they're cutting that time down to an absolute minimum that the return on investment is negligible to none. We've been told you have 30 minutes to do crisis management training and I'm going to give you an hour and a half or an hour to do an exercise. Very little to nothing can be done in that time frame. So that is one of the key trends we see really impacting the ability of using exercises to make your team better. Yet what's interesting is so many clients spend hours and hours on developing plans and strategies, writing the crisis management plan, spending a lot of time creating the scenario, yet very little time given to training or the actual exercises themselves to improve that. I will tell you, attention spans today are very, as you all know, extremely short. So you have to figure out how do I best create an exercise that's going to deal with those attention spans. Also, people's availability. As we all know, trying to plan an exercise, and here's what I always say when we work with clients, we're going to plan it for this day and whoever shows up, because that's the reality of the world and what would actually happen. Participation, getting people to actually participate, have an attention span, and get engaged is not easy. So you have to figure out as a facilitator, how do I do that best? Because that is going to impact your mock disaster exercise today. Many refuse to exercise at the highest levels. And the reason they're afraid to do this is they're afraid of failure. They're afraid of senior executives looking bad. They are afraid of looking bad. But as I said, you play like you practice. You've got to continually increase the complexity so you can play at those higher levels by doing the right exercise. Very few are incorporating external agencies or partners. This is not a nice to have anymore. It's going to be, we're going to have to do it, especially with cyber incidents, with cloud providers, with all other types of suppliers we're using today. As you mature your process and your exercises, you're going to have to include them because you really do want to know what they're going to do if you have an event or they have an event, or you're both dealing with the same event. So you need to incorporate those key people that you work with, bring them in. Now, many people are afraid because, again, maybe they're gonna find out you do have weaknesses like you are with them, but that's just part of the process of making yourself stronger. Leaders can't lead the team. Leaders can't lead the team. Just because they're a senior vice president or an executive vice president or the leader of this or that does not mean they can lead the team. Many times you'll find those that, guess what? They're not the executives, but they're dang good at leading the team. They're good at coordinating, facilitating, making decisions, being able to take in a lot of information, get a good situational awareness, and give the team direction. So you need to make sure who would be the best team leaders. And if your management team is cooperative and understanding, they hopefully will help you find those best team leaders that can do this for you and lead that team. And team leaders can change, of course, depending on the type of incident. Now, lastly, the last trend, as we all know, you got to have some sort of standardized incident management process. If you don't, good luck in managing the exercise. So that's really important. The next evolution of exercises is really critical here. I had this discussion a while back. It really is it's not about the scenario, it's about the impacts. So, a lot of times now in scenarios, it's easy just saying, here's the impacts that have happened, irrespective of the scenario, because it really is, how do I respond to whatever's happened? Next evolution is also testing real-time capabilities. That's moving more to that resiliency aspect in unplanned exercises, making sure people can do whatever they need to do in an unannounced way. Certified team members on a regular basis. We do have those clients that take this absolutely seriously, either because of regulatory or other requirements. Their teams are certified. And what I mean by that is there is a specific checklist, there's a specific set of questions, there's a specific set of assessment where those individuals are graded and certified so that they can make sure they are a part of the team and they know what they need to do. Now, yesterday we did do a simultaneous event. This is no longer, when I first started at the bank years ago, one of the assumptions we always had in our plans, there will only be one event at a time. That is so far gone today. Last year we had clients that not only were dealing with 1, 2, but they were also, in some cases, we had one that was dealing with 3 events at a time. They had a flood, they had a fire, they had wildfires in one part of the country, and they had a severe storm in their headquarters area. So I will tell you, now, you don't want to attack simultaneous events in your exercises until you reach some level of maturity. But that is now what everybody's moving to, because it's the reality of the world and what could happen. And then lastly, I'll say for your exercises, as you design your exercises, keep it simple through using that checklist manifesto approach. Make sure your folks have a simple approach to address an incident through their plans, but keep those plans simple. I will say this, you're very lucky if you can get 20 to 30% to read those crisis plans that you've written and taken all that time. So keep those plans simple and keep the approach simple, so when you do an exercise, provide them with an easy way to do it.
I'm on a call, Jalen. You cannot.
Okay, now let's talk about planning the exercise. I'm going to tell you this, do not take planning your exercise lightly. It is critical, because remember too, your reputation is on the line. Now, as the complexity of the exercise heightens from simple to moderate to highly complex, the amount of time it's going to take, of course, is going to increase. When we were working at Sandy Hook, after we were there 9 months after the shootings, and we're there for 4 years, and we started redoing all of their emergency management plans, and we started with a tabletop, then we moved to partially functional, then we moved to fully exercise. We had to make sure we didn't take this lightly because of the resource requirements, the resource needs, the time, all of those things. You're highly visible. So some of the considerations, very important, have the right exercise planning team. Once you guys can figure out what type of scenario or scenarios do we want to use, who needs to be on that exercise planning team that can help us build the right particular aspects and criteria and aspects of that exercise we want people to address. If you're having an IT exercise, you're going to need yourself, you're going to need people from IT, you may need people from the business that are impacted by that outage. So you need to take a look as you identify what scenario, who needs to be on my planning team. That planning team can be small, and I've been on planning teams where it's 20, 30 people, because they represent so many areas. We're trying to figure out how do we design it so we best impact the aspects of the organization we need to. but we're doing it the right way. So other considerations I already kind of noted before, as you plan your exercise, consider the maturity. Do not make an exercise so complex your first go around. A, no one understands. B, no one knows what to do. And C, you completely fail and everyone says, what a waste of our time. So remember, adjust the exercise and its complexity to the maturity of your team. Go back to that crawl, walk, run over time. Okay. Now, time constraints. You're going to have to address this in planning your exercise. Am I given an hour and a half? Am I given 3 hours? Are you one of those lucky ones that gets 4 hours? So it's really important in understanding in that time frame you're given as you design your exercise, how am I going to build it so it fits into that? And it also allows you then to allow time for breaks. It allows you time for debrief so that it's done in a nice, organized fashion. Now, over the years that I've done this hundreds of times now, I've gotten to the point that whatever timeline I have, I can judge by people's participation. Do they need a break before I have one scheduled? Can I give them a little longer to work with a specific aspect of the scenario I've given them? Or can I just say, you know what, we're done. Let's not beat a dead horse. Let's move on. So know what your time constraints are and work your exercise into it. Okay. Now, very important in planning your exercise. One of the things that you need to do is understand, well, what areas of weakness do we have? In many cases, if you're new, you may have many areas of weakness. Maybe you've never mobilized your team, identified who the crisis leaders are, gone through the assessing of the incident, identifying the severity level. So but instead of trying to look at all those areas, what are the 3 to 5 maybe you want to address in this exercise in your area versus trying to, again, boil the ocean? What 3 key things do we want to exercise in this particular scenario that out of it will get something, and more importantly, will improve? Now, resources required. As your exercises become more complex, you're going to need more people. You're going to impact more processes. You may need more technology, more facilities. So understand what are all the resources required to conduct a successful exercise. I will tell you, it all comes down in many cases to logistics. I've seen exercises, you plan it all and you have a couple of issues with logistics and it can make your exercise a nightmare. That's why the planning process has to be consistent. It has to be standardized. We use a very consistent approach in what the scope is, the assumptions, the objectives, the planning team, what we're trying to achieve, so that every time we don't forget what we're trying to do. What are the types of logistics we need, from everything from facilities to technology to people, etc., down to food in cases like that. So lastly, when you're planning your exercise, again, what type am I going to do? Am I just beginning? So you know what, we're just going to do a tabletop. It's going to be 2 hours long, and here's the key areas we're going to test. And then very importantly for a lot of you, it is going to take budget. You know, yesterday throughout our exercise, we had a total of 55 people. 55 people on Zoom for over 3 hours. So think about what that just cost. So in many cases, a lot of you are going to have dollars in order to plan your exercises and be able to say, I can take people from their job today, now I can pay for them to go to the exercise, especially when you're in the government sector. Typically not in the corporate sector, but you may need to have, what is your budget for this exercise? Now, here's how to document an exercise plan, even if it's a small exercise. I will tell you, it doesn't matter how small it is, create an exercise plan, even if it doesn't take you a lot. In our planning document, what's the purpose of the exercise? The scope. Is it only dealing with the crisis management team? Or the scope, it not only includes the crisis management team, but it's going to include cyber incident and aspects of our business. What are the key objectives? Don't give me 20. Give me those 3 to 5 or 5 to 7 key objectives that after the exercise, you can say, did we meet or not meet, and why? Very critical assumptions. That's so important. We've had exercises where it's critical that we know no production operations will be impacted. If we have another incident occur, we will stop the exercise and take care of the real emergency. That's actually happened. So you need to have these types of assumptions for the exercise, so that, again, no one has, as you plan it, you take all that in consideration. Are there any risks with us conducting this exercise? Now, there's a reason we always tell people when they communicate outside the room or outside the Zoom virtual conference room you're in, whenever they call anybody or they're making communications or they're talking, this is a mock disaster. We always say, tell that a couple of times. We've had events, and I will tell you, in my years, it has happened, where a simulated event becomes a real event. And what I mean by that, somebody overhears somebody talking about the mock disaster. The next thing you know, that data breach is simulated. Suddenly everyone in the company says, oh my gosh, we're part of a data breach, or we've had a shooting in a facility. You have to consider all those risks when you're doing this exercise. What does that mean, and how do I make sure we minimize them or eliminate them? Also, in your exercise plan, you have to identify people, places, and things that I need for it. I know this sounds more like project management, but I'm going to tell you, over the years and years of doing this, the reason I love following this is it eliminates errors and mistakes, because it's already enough pressure when you're out presenting a scenario and you're hoping people listen to it, they do something with it. And then lastly, we always just have an action item list. So by the end of all the planning, all the action items should be resolved. And if they're not, there's a reason why. Great resource planning for you is the Department of Homeland Security exercise planning guidelines. They're very comprehensive. You may or may not need to use them all, but you can use it as a framework. Okay, now exercise type. Select an exercise type appropriate to your team. And the first two are kind of similar, the tabletop or the structured walkthrough. As you can see, it's the walkthrough test is more, okay, can I just look at my plan? Can we run through it? Nothing at all complex to it. It's definitely from the novice perspective. It may just take days and say, we're going to run through such a small aspect. We're going to run through a very small scenario. Everybody sit down, everybody open their plan, and let's take this scenario and just go through the plan from chapter 1 through the end of through the appendices. So typically this is very good when you first start. It's definitely for the novice. It may only take days to plan, and the risk is very low, and impacts or impacts occur in your organization. Then we move more through the walkthrough drill, the simulation. This is more novice to moderate. We're now ramping up what we're doing. It may take days or weeks depending on the scenario, because now we're including more resources. We're heightening the complexity of the exercise. So we're bringing more people in. With that just comes more risk. We may include more facilities, but it's very similar. It's in a controlled environment. Everybody's in a room or in a virtual conference room. It's all controlled. Then we actually move. You can actually then move to one of the most complex, the functional drill or parallel test. This is more moderate to advanced, definitely going to take you weeks to months, and this is moderate to high. So for example, when we've done testing before, we'll have completely functionally open up our command center. We'll then fully or partially activate key aspects of our business and or other areas of our operation, where they move into actually activating their plans. How would we respond? Multiple levels of injects or communication coming from radio, from email, for in-person type communications. Extremely complex. And then we already talked about, we do a full interruption. This is truly for advanced. This is where basically it's unplanned in many cases, and we actually at this point activate our full mock disaster, or excuse me, our crisis management team. We activate all aspects of our business as we select, and we actually run through the real process of recovering and responding to an event. As I stated earlier, very few are at the full interruption, the full scale. Majority are tabletop or walkthrough drill simulation. Okay, now, what should the scenario do? I was always taught the scenario should tell a story with the beginning, a middle, and an end, and absolutely needs to align with the planning requirements. All of that planning you did in your planning document, you got to make sure that you look at your scenario from the beginning, the middle, and the end. You can go back and say, is it really aligned with the objectives we're trying to achieve? Is it aligned with the assumptions? Okay, so you got to make sure in designing the scenario, it elicits the right actions. So whatever scenario we have, what are we trying to do? And are those right actions associated with our objectives? So in the end, you can then measure and say, did the team do it or not? Use a relevant scenario. Luckily, in today's world, almost anything goes. Compared to when I first started years ago to now, these scenarios that I can use, it's amazing. And use a relevant scenario though, and start simple with that scenario as you move from novice to intermediate to advanced. By you having the right planning team, you can have them all do the right research. Because what always happens at an exercise, you always have those individuals that raise their hand. This couldn't happen. You guys are totally off. You're not in alignment. This could never happen. So that's why it's so important you do your research with the technical aspects of your scenario, so that no one can, again, you're always going to have those people that fight the scenario. So you want to be prepared on your back end. Now, it doesn't have to be complex to be successful. Okay, and I'm going to tell you, it is amazing. All I have to do, if I really want to make an exercise complex, All I have to do is start it with an evacuation of a building, and it will become so confusing. Senior management typically will need so much time just to deal with the evacuation, accountability, let alone moving to the actual, now where are we at and how do we move forward? So it doesn't have to be complex to be successful. I'll give you another example. Working with a very large healthcare system. Our scenario, I know this sounds so simple. It was their shared services facility that supports all of the 15 hospitals. All we did was cause a power outage. They had no backup power to this actual shared service facilities, which they knew that what caused havoc. They could no longer support the hospitals. They had minimal to no manual workaround procedures, as that was probably one of the easiest ones that caused the most havoc, and it didn't have to be complex. Now, very important, use pauses and breaks. If things start to go bad, myself as a facilitator, I know when to stop everybody and say, take a break, let's reset, what just happened and why. There's nothing wrong with that, because what we're trying to do is get people to, again, deal with the scenario, run through what they would do, and if it's good, let them continue. If they're confused, you can say, everybody just stop for a second, take a 2-second break. Let's go back. What did we just do and why? What should we have done? So use those pauses. There's nothing wrong with that. Be prepared for that. Know when to interject. And then very importantly, breaks. Breaks are critical. Now, in a real incident, we all know there are no breaks, but it does help, because in today's, especially if it's a highly stressed type of exercise or very complex, people do in around 90 minutes. Typically, people need some time. So know when to use those pauses and breaks. And that's also can be based on your culture and how you typically work. So remember that. Remember and have that planned out in your timeline and in your planning document. So the output is you really want to use the best possible exercise that's going to prepare them for a real event. Here's one thing that I yet to get not understand in many cases is, if we do a scenario, let's say we do a cyber, a hurricane, we've had those that want to do, the absolute worst case, whatever the scenario is, all of the information that you gather from that exercise, it really becomes your pre-planning checklist. It becomes so valuable because people have said, here's all the things we do for that specific incident. So a lot of our clients have said, this is great. So every scenario we run, we gather all of the high level tasks and the most relevant tasks that we gathered from that. That becomes our pre-planning document for that incident. So that's really important. Remember that. Don't let this go wasted. So important. All right. So building the scenario, that is the one thing that I love to do the most. Building scenarios is a lot of fun, because you get all these people coming together. They have an opportunity to some love to make other people's life difficult, or they want to say, hey, let's stress test this area. Let's see what they think of this. That's why when you get the right planning team that knows all the aspects of the business, you may not know as a facilitator. So it's going to be, remember, everybody's going to scrutinize it. So do your best to do it right. So determine if it's what type of incident it's going to be. Is it going to be natural, human, or technological? Build a summary of the event. Here's kind of, guys, here's a scenario. Here's a paragraph as how we'd like this to unfold. Okay. Now, align your objectives, as I said earlier, back to the scenario to make sure that scenario is meeting those objectives. Now, build an inject and timeline to tell the story. So remember, here's how it typically will work. You have a baseline scenario that gives everybody the overall view from a date and time, from weather, etc. Here's basically what we know happened. And then after that, we have injects. Injects are simply updates to that baseline scenario. So you build this inject and timeline, so you tell the story from beginning to middle to end. Now, a lot of clients today will tell you, Michael, I don't want the scenario to end bad. Well, that's not real world. But in a lot of cases, remember, when you do this, you need to work with your management. When you design the scenario, people are going to be again, you got to be very careful in, are we going to cause injuries? Are we going to cause deaths? You need to make sure that you do have that management you can go back to and say, here's a scenario we're going to run. Are you okay with it? If you're concerned about specific aspects, so you don't present it and then find yourself on the hot seat. Now, quality over quantity of injects. I have, my early days, I will say, I probably had too many in-depth injects or updates to the baseline scenario, too many. What you find over time, depending on the team and its level of maturity, look at the quality and not the quantity. Maybe you only need for a 2-hour scenario, maybe you only need 3 injects. When you get to highly complex, it could be in the 10s, 20, 30, 40, 50, depending on how much time you have for them. So remember that. Quality is more important than the actual quantity. And then lastly, make sure, like I said, validate your scenario when you're done. That is so key. So there are no questions from anyone that is it right? Does it make sense? Not only from a time perspective that you simulated, but the actual scenario itself. Okay. Wow. This is the key. You can design the best exercise scenario. You can have all the right planning people, but if the individual that's facilitating the exercise is not good, it will fail. I have seen this because it's key for the facilitator. Their whole job is facilitating and moving it along, knowing when to keep people going when they're doing well, knowing when to stop them, knowing when to pause them, knowing when to give them a break. And this all has to go back to achieving the objectives of the exercise. If you're not a good facilitator, be honest with yourself and find an individual, find someone who can lead your exercises, learn from it, and then take over. Because otherwise, I'll tell you, when you've got 40, 50, maybe you have 20 or 10, typically those that come to the exercise scenario are the top people in your organization. The last thing they want to do is say, why did I spend my 3 hours here or 2 hours? Or you start to see them, they're on their phones or their tablets and they're completely ignoring you. Facilitation is key to the exercise. Very importantly too, when you're facilitating the exercise, as you become, again, have a heightened level of maturity, I'm going to tell you, your team's also going to get smarter and better. So as you're running an exercise, they may go a different direction than you thought they would. You need to be prepared as a facilitator to adjust your scenario as they adjust it, as they become smarter and better. They may come up with a different way that works, and you're like, well, my next inject doesn't address it. You're going to have to know when to change the exercise on the fly. So that's why facilitation is so key. So in the end, the return on investment, not only from yourself, from the planning team, but the most important from the participants in the organization is met. All right. Do please keep it on time. Oh, one thing I left out here. Complex exercise may require multiple facilitators. I have been in exercises that were so large that we also had multiple sites, and we may have 3 to 5 different facilitators running their specific site, and they'd all come back to me as to where each site was as we were running through all of the different aspects of the joint and integrated exercise. Keep it on time and on point. There's nothing better I love that I may change how things run and how much time I give people depending on how they're doing, but I'm always able to get done at least 5 minutes before the end time. People feel good that you got through it all. You give a little bit of time back on their calendar. You want them to leave there going, man, this was so well run and facilitated. It was a great day. I learned something. Okay. There's nothing better when you start to do this and you watch people that basically all you do is give them the scenario and they run with it. That's when you know you're starting to have some success. When it's like, just get out of our way. We know what to do. Just throw us the injects as you move forward, but we got this. Okay. So that's really important. All right. Now, as we all know, there's incident priorities and objectives. And why is this important? Because again, as you design your scenarios, you want to make sure people are following basic incident priorities. All right. The first priority, goes without saying, is life safety. Incident stabilization. Once I know people are safe and I've got everything good, I can start to stabilize the incident as best I can and minimize more damage. Then how can I preserve my property if that's an issue? And then I finally will worry about restoration in the business. Here's why I tell you this. I've been in exercises before where there has been a life safety, there's been injuries, there may have been deaths, and it's amazing how many times as we run through this with management in their scenario, they just gloss over that and quickly move to, how do I get to stabilization and restoration of the business? So always use these priorities and objectives in planning your scenario. If it's relevant, if it's a cyber, you don't need to worry about life safety, right? Unless it's, of course, affecting life safety type systems. But be very keen in making sure that as you design your scenario, that you watch people work. Are they also aligned with these priorities and objectives so they follow that same approach to every incident? Okay. This is a real, if there's yesterday, as I did this exercise, one of the things that I told the senior team was this. If there's one thing, because I know the majority of people that'll read their plan is limited. Let's just be completely honest. Okay, you're going to write a fabulous crisis or incident management plan. It's going to give me the scope, the assumptions, the severity levels, how I activate it, how I mobilize, what my role is, beautifully written. And then you say, how many people read their plan? Or How many people even brought their plan? That is one of the first things I look for. How many people bring their plan to the exercise? There may be a small number, and then when you go to do the exercise, they're not looking at their roles and responsibilities or their checklist and has to give them guidance. They're still going off the top of their head. So take that as for what it is. You hope they do that. There are organizations where it is taken seriously and people do bring their books and they read it, like those that are certified as part of the team. But if there's one methodology, I would say, if you could get this across to your team, it's called API. Assess, A is for assess, P is for plan, I is for implement, E is for evaluate. It's a common emergency management methodology. It's used by fire, police, and we all do this each and every day. We just, a lot of times this is perfect for a real disruption or even a mock disaster, right? We want to use this as part of our crisis management approach. So what you want your team to do as you present the scenario and subsequent injects or updates, first thing you want them to do, assess what is the current situation? What is the risk to the organization? What is the risk to people, process, and technology? What exactly do we know about the situation based on what we know, what the risks are? And then second, based on what we know about the situation, what plan do we need to enact? Not 100 different steps, but what are the top 3 to 5 strategic steps based on our assessment of that situation do we need to implement to address the current situation? Implement based on our assessment of the level of risk, the level of impact, based now on the 3 to 5 things we want people to do. Who are we going to assign to go off and tactically implement that for us? Here's one of the problems you'll see with most crisis management teams as you run through mock disasters. These are the top people in the organization. There's a reason they're there. They're good at fixing problems. The issue is you're going to find in real situations, you need this crisis team to be strategic, not tactical in nature. And this teaches them to assess, plan, and delegate. Hand it off to somebody, let them tactically implement your strategic steps that you want them to go off, and let them do their job. When a disruption occurs, remember, it's going to start small. And your crisis team may only be 3 to 5 roles. But as it, again, gains complexity or impact, it's going to grow significantly. And then once it gets down, it's going to contract. So this is why this process or methodology is so key. One of the best exercises we had today, or in the past, back in 2020, one of the senior leaders made their team stop at every inject I gave and said, okay, let's go through the API process, and made them go through assess, plan, implement, evaluate. It was amazing. By the end, this team was brand new. And the poor person they assigned the lead was so nervous at the beginning. By the end, by using this, her level of confidence was outstanding because she now knew whatever came before her, I will assess it, plan it, implement, and then the next time we have a status briefing, we'll evaluate. So it's a consistent process and very well worth, again, implementing with your team. Okay, as you can see here, here's a little bit more detail on the API process. So on the assessment side, kind of assessing the risk, what is it? Surveying the scene if you can, getting some intel. Now, remember this, and I've seen this paralyze teams. They think they're going to get 100% of the information. We all know in real events, we don't know all the information. We only maybe get 30, 40, 50, 60%. One of my best lines, I use it over and over, Colin Powell's line, in war, if I have 60% of the information, I go with it. I have seen crisis teams, not only in exercises, but real time, expect they're waiting, that they're gonna get all the information. It's not gonna, it's real, it's not gonna happen. You gotta do your best with what you have and hopefully make the best decision possible. Now, last one sounds simple. As part of the assessment and determining the risk and what it impacts, establishing command. How many times is it the infamous, who's in charge here? Who's leading this? Now, this is why it comes back to, are the individuals that you either selected or could be in charge, are they ready to be in charge? You will find when you do exercises, there will those that'll be, I love it, and there's those that I don't want to do it. Give you a very situation that ended up being extremely embarrassing for an executive, a large financial institution. We're doing an exercise that required the chief information officer to be in command. That individual did not want to be in command. Made it clear, the CEO who was managing or monitoring the exercise from an outside observer perspective actually came in and said, since this individual doesn't want to take command, I will take command as a CEO of the company. Not good. So be prepared in that, assess who's in command and make sure they're ready to be in command. Step two, once we assess, make sure we look at our plan, prioritize what our strategic objectives should be and what our action plan should be. Assign that out to those individuals and have them go off and implement those, and you give them a specific time frame to go and do it. In an exercise, this may be a very short period of time, okay? But you at least go off and let them simulate what they do. And then you come back again to your next inject. You may hold a briefing and say, how did we do? Okay, so sample scenarios. So you may have crisis management teams. You know what you can do? Identify individuals to represent the following roles. You could actually do this pretty quickly. You know, if you wanted to do some, just like a case study, if you wanted to run some really simple sample scenarios, get your team together, identify people that can fit the key roles, such as somebody to lead the team, communications, resources, business, human resources, business continuity, information technology. You know, give them a simple case study to deal with. Here's a simple type scenario to start with. And then let them, each team's gonna have 10 to 15 minutes to go over and say, hey, how would we deal with this? What's happening? You know, internal, external communications, and then share their results on how they would have managed it. So you can see it's really simple as you first start. You may start with some really just simple case studies versus those scenarios that run, you know, that are gonna run anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. All right, this kind of gives you some ideas. Here's some scenarios you may wanna use. And here's what I love about some of these scenarios. What I think even challenges people more is even you may want to use scenarios that have nothing to do with your organization. And I love that, so consider that. So a lot of times I'll throw this as one of our case studies. I'll throw this out on a team that's maybe in the financial institution or in a manufacturing, because it has them think a lot differently than what they do today and say, gosh, what would I do if I was in charge of this team? And it exercises different muscles because it's more about what are the impacts, and let me think about it. So here's one, is if they were a school district incident management team, it gives them an overview as to all of the different aspects of that school district and how would they deal with it. So again, if you can use I use unique approaches a lot of time, but of course I'm going to design a scenario specifically for them once we go through the formal exercise. And you can see here, in this here, you're going to have this. It gives you an idea. You can turn this even actually into your own scenario. Gives you an idea as to what happened in the scenario where we had hazardous material type spill. What exactly happened? What happened to the specific individuals that were impacted by that event? What does that mean back to your scenario and your crisis management team? So this would be a very helpful sample scenario. You can switch this around and change this into your own scenario and then begin to plan appropriate timelines and specifics as you present. And here's a second scenario you may want to use and alter to your specific organization. This is a sample mobile payments company. It's headquartered in San Francisco, 1,000 employees. BCM program is new. All of those key things. Data centers are in co-location sites. Primary call center at the headquarters, no backup. Think about how you could actually turn this into your organization and how you could begin to use this, begin to design scenarios time over as you grow in your organization. Now, this actually happened. So this is an interesting scenario because the scenario we used is real, where they had protesters come in, they took control over the building, and at that point in time, they came into protest against the Bureau of Land Management. The building got closed, and the building got closed for almost 2 days. So they had to come up, their BCM program was new, but this is now a scenario you could use as well. This actually did happen. One of the most interesting scenarios that, you know, in a threat and risk assessment we used to do was civil unrest. And in a majority of cases, civil unrest was always low, right? It was so far down on the list. But that's changed dramatically in today's threat and risk assessment, especially with clients that have locations or operations in high, those areas that, you know, that have, again, a high position, such as New York City, San Francisco, LA, Miami, many different locations that, you know what, they're at the top of the list of the top cities in our country. Portland, Seattle. So civil unrest has changed, and a lot of people are using those today because those scenarios, because it's real to them, and all the things they already have to deal with and the damages to their building. And then lastly, I won't go too far, and this is another scenario you'll have in this particular deck. This is more if you're a global real estate company incident. This is where a real estate organization, very large, they're having a major event, a conference, and it's holding its annual global corporate get together, and then they have an active shooter. Okay, so those three scenarios can be used by you. So you're able to take one, adjust them, and begin to use them. Or you may just say, guys, let's just see what would we do if we were this type of company, to get them to think outside the box as to what should happen. So they're there for you and available for you to use as part of this. Okay, so final thoughts. This is really key because I do believe in this. I will tell you, if you can get the right humans in the right seats, and I will tell you, in all of the organizations I've worked, they may not have the perfect crisis process, they may not have read their plan, but if I can get the right people in the right seats, have them use that simple API process where they already know the business, we just put the methodology and approach around it, where we use API, where we do a status briefing on a regular basis, we create an action plan every time we meet, we'll get through it. So remember, in this, you as the facilitator, as the business continuity, get the right humans in the right seats. You don't want to be in that incident and go, oh my gosh, this individual or individuals, they're not built to do this. So remember that. This is important. This is the lifeblood of your company. Okay, focus on making incremental gains. I think everybody understands that. Don't start out where people are so confused that your exercise fails and it reflects badly on you. You do not want that to happen. So incremental gains. We've done exercises, guess what, where we've only done 2 injects because all we wanted to do was test specific aspects. Or we've actually done a scenario for a second time. First time didn't go so well. So we redid it and people got better because it was more about the process and the methodology than the actual scenario. So remember that. Okay, we already talked about it, building on past performance. Okay, create an easy to use incident management process. I've seen crisis management plans, they're 100 pages long. Make sure it's easy for somebody to see what their role and responsibility is. Top 10 things they got to do that they may forget. Okay, use that checklist manifesto approach. Remember that. What are the top 10 to 15 things? Most of the time, it's top 10 that I may forget that I need to remember as part of this team. We already talked not about the number of injects or the length. I can have just as good an exercise in 45 minutes, to 2 hours versus an all-day exercise. I've been part of those, or I've been part of multi-day exercises. Okay, it's about the quality and thought that's put into the scenario. Now, perfect is the enemy of the good. This is something, guys, don't over-plan it. Do not over-plan your exercise. You've got to let people figure things out. Yesterday, one of the big issues was, as part of our exercise planning, well, we should create all of the sub-team rooms in Zoom for them. And I was like, guys, they're gonna have to figure this out. Do not overplan your exercise. You gotta let people, again, build your scenario, let them deal with it, and let them come up with ideas. Trust me, they will figure it out. That's how they get better. Now, and then lastly, focus on the outcome. This is what we're trying to do with our objectives. Target focus, build your capability over time. And in the end, because what is it we're trying to really do? In the end, through these exercises and this training, in the end, it really comes down to, can we recover? Can we not? Can we deal with the disruption in a really standardized approach? So no matter what the event is, we have the process and the methodology, and we can recover. Very important. Okay. So in summary, always remember the human factor. Remember that. Crisis and mock disaster exercise, if there's anything and everything, you are going to uncover the human factor. Those that are really good, those that maybe are very conversational in a day-to-day, you bring them into an exercise, they don't say a word. You will begin to see the true human factor. Number 2, I already said this enough times, but again, plan your exercise. Plan it, have the right team, get them together, and make sure you select the right exercise type as to where you're at on the maturity continuum. Build that appropriate scenario, make sure it tells a story, and it doesn't always have to end in a happy ending. Remember that. It could be, hey, you know what, guys, we didn't recover, or guess what? We had this loss, or this building is not going to come back. Doesn't always have to end perfectly. Make sure you have a good facilitator. Make sure you have a good facilitator, because it's going to make you look good, and it's going to make sure people leave there happy, and you're going to get return on investment because they saw it as a value of the time. Their time was valued, and they got through it. Get through the conducting of the exercise, and then lastly, very important, don't forget to document the exercise. Document the exercise, what went well, what didn't, and then who's responsible for fixing those issues. And then in the end, go back and update your process. So when you come back to do it again, you're ready to go. Okay. All right. I want to thank everybody. Thank you for your time. I hope that now let's take a look here. Let's take a look at some of the questions or comments. And let me make sure everybody is, let's see here. My apologies. I think I'm on Zoom overload. I got to find out where to go back and unmute everybody. Catherine, can you help me with that? All right, let's take a look at the chat questions here. All right. Yes, number one, the recording will be shared, so you'll have all the slides with you. Yep, presentation slides. You'll have the recording of those slides. Okay. No, we're not going to provide a certificate of attendance for this particular one. We've not done that before, but that, that's something that I'm going to take as a potential that we could consider. Okay. All right. All right. Let's see. Was there anything else here? Thank you. Now, I do have some other questions that were provided before. I'll answer those quickly here. Let's see. All right. There's one question here. How do facilitators determine the outcome of the exercise? So the question is on that, is that the outcome from how well they did or how well they responded and what their solutions were to the problems you brought them? So that's really important by if you have the right objectives. Okay, it says Mark now says response. How to determine the response of the exercise? So very important as you go through each inject, you come up with exactly what you want them to, what scenario you're presenting to them at that time, what the update is to the scenario. Below that, you have actions you want them to take, and then you also then define what should they have done. So again, depending on the update, you say, here's the 3 things I want you to consider, and then off to your right, only for you and your team, you identify what are those 3 to 5 things they should do, so that when you complete the end of the exercise, you can go through each inject and say, yes, they did what they were supposed to do, they didn't, and then where should they be? So by the time you finish, you're going to have a really good grade, not only how they did on each individual inject, but overall. Okay. What kind of prep should you give to the participants? You've got to give them something today. You've got to give them some sort of prep that says, here's what's expected of you as a crisis management team member. Here's your role and your responsibility. And here's what's expected of you in the exercise. You have to tell them this is not a test. You're not going to be evaluated. And this has no one's going to come to you and knock on your door or your cube and say, you know what, you did really bad in that exercise. We need to talk to you. You need to make sure that this is an open area for communication for us to make mistakes before an actual event actually happens. All right. Now, one of the great questions, with so much of the workforce working from home now, what types of scenarios can we have value since we're now living our go home or alternate work site strategies? Here's what happened. A lot of times people think now with everybody moving out that we're not going to have more risk. We actually have more risk because people are working from home in areas of the country that are susceptible to other risks. They're not only susceptible to natural disasters, they're susceptible to regional power outages. And you know what? They're not at the hardened facilities that we have as a corporation. So there's a lot of different exercises you can use that provide you with the ability to still test people even though they're working from home or remotely. Now, or working from home and or corporate. I see in the future the hybrid approach. So you're going to have a scenario that not only impacts headquarters, but impacts those working remotely as well. During the pandemic, did you see an increase in tabletop exercises? Yes. Yes, we did. So that's really important. Very important. Did the pandemic, did you see an increase? More exercises this year than you know. Let me tell you what one of the top exercises was this year. Salesforce. Salesforce scenario was huge. When you start to look at a loss of technology, especially Salesforce, and its enterprise-wide impact to an organization, a lot of people concerned with Salesforce, just because they want to make sure they're prepared should it go down, because so many depend on it. Independent observers, if you are going to use them, people, please make sure they have a checklist. Okay, You can't also, as an evaluator, you don't want them talking to people. They can only ask questions. You know, they can ask, what are you doing and why? They're not there to provide any answers. They're simply there to go around and say, what are you doing? May I see what you're doing? But again, that's really important. Make sure they have a checklist as to what to look for, so you don't have 2, 3, 4, 5 observers and they're not using the same approach to ask people. And then their job in the end is just to come back and say, this is what we saw. Based on the checklist, was it good or not? Okay? All right. Okay. Question here. Then I will get back. There's another question from Francis Byrne. I'll get right to that. Any advice on how to engage the top management in these type of exercises? Based on the crisis incident management team, typically those already in the crisis team are already at a high level. Typically, Andrew, you may be asking more about, what about the senior levels, such as senior vice president, executive vice presidents? What we typically like to do in these exercises is those people that are at that, typically at the C level, typically what we'll do as part of the crisis team is they'll go through the scenario, but then we'll always ask them, can you provide us a status update back up to senior management? So not only do we have them engage in the exercise by us providing input, or I'm sorry, providing a status to them, they also can provide questions or inquiries as to where we're at. Secondly, what I love to see is when senior management comes into an exercise and they talk about why it's important, what level of expectation do they have, and level of participation. But again, very important, we always like to include those C-level people through the crisis, through the exercise itself, by providing regular status updates back to them. Okay, let me go back to Francis. There it is. Does client have any input to planning team? Okay, so, and Francis, I hope this answers your question here. Does the client have any input to planning team? Planning teams are critical. Today, in a lot of cases, we call them the look ahead team or the plan ahead team. I love being part of the planning team. The planning team has such a cool role because their job is basically looking at everything that's coming in and helping the crisis team plan maybe for the next 24 hours, the next 48 hours. But it also can be saying, gosh, guys, can you help me plan out if this goes this way? Can we plan out for the next week? So you need to have people that have a good overall knowledge of the organization in different fields, so that if you need to bring that planning team, you can bring them up that particular state of the incident or issues, and they can produce that plan for you. What should our plan look in the next 24 hours? Maybe the 72 hours. Plan ahead or forward look team is critical. Okay, wow, what a great number of questions. Outstanding. Let's see, I think you covered most of the other questions I had that came in. I think you did. I think everybody's covered most of those questions. Now, remember one of the questions I think I answered. Can a mock disaster turn into a real disaster? Remember, tell everybody when they're in the mock disaster, any communications out that secure area you're working in, whether it's a physical location or out of the Zoom, tell everybody, you must say, this is a mock disaster. This is a mock disaster. Or your mock disaster is going to turn into a real disaster. And I'll tell you, you don't want to be the president saying, thanks a lot for spreading this. I got chaos everywhere because everybody thinks it's real. So remember that. Okay, I think that's it. I want to thank everyone for such outstanding questions. And it was really, really good. Thank you, everybody. And hey, look forward to our next webinar in April. Richard Long is going to be providing the next wonderful subject on business continuity. Everybody be safe and make sure you're ready for your next mock disaster. Talk to you later.